I was stirring a cup of instant coffee when the pounding started a deep, forceful thud that shook the thin aluminum skin of my trailer. It was barely sunrise, the sky still bruised with night, and the cold Virginia air seeped through the window seams as if trying to warn me that whatever waited outside was nothing ordinary. I froze with the spoon still in my hand. No one knocked like that out here, not unless something was very wrong. I moved to the window, pushing aside the thin curtain with trembling fingers. That was when I saw them. 3 black SUVs idled in the dirt outside my trailer engines, humming headlights slicing through the morning fog. The vehicles were spotless, tinted heavy in presence, the kind you see in news footage behind important figures, the kind that never show up by accident. My heart lurched. These weren't local deputies or county officials. This was federal. And federal never came for someone like me. 2 men stepped out of the lead vehicle. Both wore dark suits, not uniforms, with the unmistakable gleam of Department of Defense identification clipped to their belts. One scanned the property with sharp, alert eyes as if assessing every detail of the small, sagging lot I called home. The other approached my door with the steady gait of someone accustomed to carrying news that could upend another person's entire world. The knock came again, louder, firmer, too strong for me to ignore. I inhaled, opened the door, just a crack. Enough to see their faces, enough for them to see mine. The man closest to me removed his sunglasses, revealing calm, gray eyes that seemed to study not just my appearance, but my history, as if he were confirming a file photo in real time. "Ma'am," he said, his tone formal yet gentle. "Are you Evelyn Harper?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I managed. "Who are you?" He held his badge into the sliver of open space. "We are here on behalf of the United States Department of Defense." My stomach dropped. "What for?" He paused as though choosing words that would land softly, though nothing could have. "Ma'am, it's about General Lucas Gray. He named you in his final directive." The name hit me like a physical blow. Lucas. 30 years dissolved in an instant. I saw him again as he had been 19, soaked from the rain. Hungry, scared, trying so hard to hide how lost he felt. A boy in a soldier's uniform who looked at me like I was the first safe thing he'd found in months. My knees weakened. I don't understand," I whispered. The second man stepped closer. "Ma'am, we cannot discuss details here. Please come with us." I blinked at him. "Come with you where to Washington?" he said softly. "The Pentagon." The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. I lived in a sagging trailer with peeling paint and a heater that barely worked. I was 61, invisible to the world, a woman whose life had shrunk to the size of unpaid bills and quiet evenings with nothing but memories for company. The Pentagon had no business knowing I existed, but the men at my door weren't joking. Their expressions held certainty, not confusion. Resolve, not hesitation. General Gray left explicit instructions. The first man continued, "We were to locate you immediately." My hands shook. I opened the door wider without realizing I had moved. "Why me?" I whispered. What did he say? "Everything will be explained once we arrive," he answered. "Please gather what you need. We will escort you." I stepped back numb, reaching for my coat with movements that didn't feel like my own. A single thought pulsed through me, louder than fear, louder than disbelief. He remembered me, after all these years. He remembered. The SUV door closed behind me with a heavy final thud, the kind that makes you feel as if you've been sealed inside another world. I sat stiffly in the back seat, my worn coat bunched awkwardly under me, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked against the spotless leather interior. The engine hummed beneath my feet as we pulled away from my trailer, the only home I had known for the past 12 years, its chipped paint and sagging steps disappearing into the fog behind us. It struck me then just how absurd this moment was, a 61-year-old waitress turned recluse, being driven to the Pentagon in a federal convoy. The 2 Defense Department liaisons sat in the front, their profiles stone-still faces lit by the faint glow of the dashboard. I could see both of them watching me from the mirror, not unkindly, but with a level of attention that made it clear they understood the weight of what they were transporting. I folded my hands to stop them from shaking. "Can someone please tell me what this is about?" My voice sounded small in the enclosed space. The man in the passenger seat turned slightly. "Ms. Harper, I promise we'll explain everything as soon as we arrive. There are details we're not authorized to discuss outside a secure environment." I let out a shaky breath. "This is about Lucas, isn't it?" He paused, then nodded. "General Gray left a directive, very specific instructions to locate you. It took time. You changed your last name, moved several times, and rural records from the 90s weren't digitized." "I wasn't hiding," I whispered. "I just lived." "We know," he said gently, but he was determined. Finding you mattered to him. I pressed a hand to my chest. The memory of Lucas's face, young, tired, grateful, slowly rose like a ghost I thought I had buried. "He remembered me, ma'am," the driver said, glancing at me through the mirror. "He never forgot you." "Not for a single year." Something cracked open inside me. I turned toward the window to hide my expression. The landscape rolled past frost-covered fields, clusters of bare trees, small houses still dark with sleep. The world looked unchanged, ordinary, unaware that my life had just tilted in a direction I never expected again. "Did he—" I swallowed. "Did he say why?" The men exchanged a brief look. "We believe you'll understand better once you read his letter," the passenger replied. He left it sealed. "No one has opened it." A sealed letter, from a general, addressed to me, 30 years after a rain-soaked boy in uniform walked into my diner. My throat tightened as a wave of memories hit me harder than the vehicle's momentum, the way Lucas had held the mug of hot chocolate like it was the only warm thing in his life, the way he wrote down my words on that napkin with trembling hands, the way he said he would repay me someday. A promise I never believed he meant. A promise he apparently never forgot. The SUV merged onto the highway. Fog thinned as pale morning light washed over the road. I could see the reflection of my face in the window, older, lined, worn, and I wondered what Lucas would have seen if he were here. Would he still recognize the woman who fed him that night, or had life carved me into someone else entirely? The passenger cleared his throat softly. "Ms. Harper, for what it's worth, General Gray spoke of you with a level of respect we rarely hear. Whatever happened between you two, it mattered. Deeply." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the impossible truth that kept repeating in my mind. He remembered me, not as a passing kindness, not as a moment lost to time, but enough to send the Pentagon for me, enough to search for decades, enough to leave his final words in my hands. And as the skyline of Washington began to form in the distance, shimmering under the early sun, I felt both terrified and certain of only one thing. Whatever waited for me at the Pentagon would change everything I thought I knew about Lucas Gray and everything I thought I knew about myself. I remember the night so clearly that sometimes I wonder if time has circled back, leaving the moment permanently etched into my bones. It was late November of 1991. A cold so sharp it sliced through the walls of Harper's Diner like a blade. I had been working the night shift for months ever since the divorce finalized, and since grief hollowed out everything inside me after losing my son Jacob 2 years earlier. I worked nights because nights were easier. Fewer people meant fewer conversations I had to fake. The silence suited me. It felt like the only time of day when no one expected anything from me. That night, the rain came hard, the kind of relentless icy rain that made the neon diner sign flicker as if it were shivering. I was wiping down the counter preparing to close early because there had been no customers for hours when I saw something through the window. At first, I thought it was just the storm playing tricks on my eyes, but then the door pushed open and a gust of wind swept in, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and cold earth. A young man stepped inside. No stumbled inside. He was a soldier, or at least dressed like one, wearing a thin, soaked-through uniform jacket that clung to him like another layer of rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his sleeves, puddling on the floor. His face was pale, jaw tight, as if he were fighting not to shiver, but his eyes were what caught me. Those eyes, wide, exhausted, uncertain. Eyes that belonged to someone too young to have seen as much fear as they carried. He looked around as if trying to determine whether he was allowed to exist in this space. "Kitchen's closed," I said out of habit, even though something in me already knew I wasn't going to send him away. He swallowed hard. "I'm not here for a meal. He held up his hands, which were trembling. "I'm lost. I was heading back to the base and I ran out of money. I was hoping maybe, if you needed someone to mop floors or stack crates or something, I'd work for food if you're willing." His voice cracked on the last word. There was something about the way he said food, as if it carried more weight than it should, as if admitting hunger was harder for him than admitting weakness. He couldn't have been more than 19. 19. The same age Jacob would have been that year. My throat tightened. "Sit down," I said. He blinked as if he didn't understand the instruction. "Ma'am, sit," I repeated, pointing toward the counter. "You look like you're about to fall over." He obeyed slowly, sinking into the nearest stool. I walked behind the counter and grabbed a clean towel, handing it to him. "Dry off before you catch pneumonia." "Thank you," he murmured, pressing the towel against his face, eyes slipping shut from exhaustion. I cracked eggs onto the griddle before he could object. A few minutes later, I set a plate of scrambled eggs toast and a cup of hot chocolate in front of him. He stared at the plate like he wasn't sure it was real. "Ma'am, I can't pay for this." "I didn't ask you to," I said. "Eat." He lifted the fork with shaking hands. He took a bite, and I watched his eyes close again, but this time not from tiredness. The kind of relief that comes after days without warmth or safety washed over his face. His voice broke when he whispered "thank you." And then, to my surprise, tears slid down his cheeks. Not loud sobs, not dramatic crying, just silent, unstoppable tears from someone who had held them back too long. Something cracked open in me when I saw that. The grief I carried, the grief that had hardened into something sharp and cold, softened just a little. "What's your name?" I asked quietly. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "I'm Lucas." He hesitated before adding, "Private First Class Lucas Gray, ma'am." "Just Lucas is fine." "Yes, ma'am." He gave a sheepish smile as though afraid he had done something wrong, which only made him look younger. "So what happened to get you stranded in this weather?" I asked. He sipped the hot chocolate like it was a lifeline. "Bus got rerouted. I don't know this area well, ended up walking for miles hoping the next diner or gas station would still be open. How long has it been since you ate?" He shrugged. "A day, maybe 2. My chest tightened. That was hunger that carved the face, the kind that made cheeks hollow and eyes brighter with desperation. "And you said you're headed back to base." "Yes. I'm supposed to report at 0600, but—" His voice trailed off again. "I got lost. You're not from around here." "No, ma'am. Born and raised in Wyoming. Joined the Army right after high school." "Why?" He looked down at the plate. Thought it would make me braver than I felt. His honesty hit me unexpectedly. The world often demands soldiers be stoic, unbreakable, void of fear. But here he was, barely grown, admitting the truth most adults never say out loud. "Being brave isn't about not being scared," I said as I wiped the counter. "It's choosing someone else's safety over your own." He lifted his gaze to me with an expression I didn't understand at the time, something like reverence or maybe recognition. Then he reached for a napkin and scribbled down the words I'd just spoken. His handwriting was cramped quick, as though the words were slipping through his fingers and he needed to catch them. "Why are you writing that down?" I asked. He shook his head. "Because no one's ever said something like that to me before, and I don't want to forget it." I leaned against the counter. "What brought you in tonight?" "Really?" He hesitated. "The lights. It was the only place that didn't look abandoned." We talked for hours after that. Or rather, he talked and I listened. He told me about growing up in the foster system after his mother died, about the string of towns he moved through, about enlisting because it felt like the only path left. "I don't know what I'm doing most days," he admitted, "but tonight, you made me feel human again." I swallowed the ache rising in my chest. "Soldiers don't always come back," I said gently. He looked straight at me. "Then I'll come back because I owe you. I'll repay you someday, Evelyn, I swear." And for a moment, in the yellow glow of the diner lights with the rain hitting the windows and the night humming around us, I believed him. But soldiers rarely get to choose which promises they keep. That night was the first and last time I saw him, or so I believed. After that night in 1991, the world did not shift all at once. It slipped quietly back into its familiar patterns, though something inside me felt permanently altered. For the first few days, I found myself glancing at the diner door whenever the bell chimed, half expecting to see Lucas walk in again dripping rainwater and offering that shy, grateful smile. But he never did. Life has a way of teaching you not to expect returns, and yet somehow he lingered in my thoughts, a ghost of a moment that felt too vivid to fade. Weeks passed, then months. I worked the same night shifts, mopped the same floors, locked the same doors. But occasionally, when a young soldier came through the diner on their way to or from the nearby training grounds, I searched their faces without meaning to, hoping for even the smallest resemblance. There were none. Every now and then, I'd catch a news report on the television in the corner of the diner, footage of military convoys moving through desert terrain, young men in uniform looking far older than their years. Sometimes, if a soldier turned toward the camera just right, I felt a jolt of recognition, only to remind myself it couldn't be him. It was too soon, or too far, or too unlikely. He had been just one of thousands. Still, every time I saw those broadcasts, I whispered a small prayer under my breath, asking whatever forces watched over lost boys in uniforms to keep him safe. There were moments I considered writing to his base, asking if Private First Class Lucas Gray had made it back that morning, or if he had transferred somewhere else. But I never sent a letter. Part of me feared it would seem foolish or intrusive. Another part feared the silence that might follow. Eventually, my life unraveled further. The diner, already struggling in a dying town, shut its doors for good. I remember locking it for the last time, the echo of the deadbolt sounding like the final breath of something that had kept me going. I packed my belongings and left, moving from one rented room to another, chasing cheaper rent, quieter neighborhoods, anywhere the memories felt a little less sharp. I remarried briefly, then left that marriage too, shedding another last name like an old skin. Years folded into one another, and the distance between me and that rain-soaked night stretched until it felt unreal. It was only much later, more than a decade afterward, when a former coworker from the diner called me out of the blue, that I learned the truth. She had taken over sorting the mail during the final weeks before the diner closed. "Evelyn," she said, "I found 3 letters addressed to you, all from a soldier named Gray. They were sent after you moved." Her words punched the air from my lungs. Letters. 3 of them. Written by Lucas. Lost to a change of address in the collapse of a forgotten diner. She no longer had them. The new owners had tossed everything during renovations. The letters were gone forever. I thanked her, hung up, and sat for a long time in silence, feeling the weight of the years between us grow impossibly heavy. We had both reached for each other in the dark, only to miss by inches. So I convinced myself he had lived his life and I lived mine, and whatever moment we had shared was meant to stay small, meant to stay in 1991. I had no idea that somewhere out there his life was unfolding in ways I could not imagine, nor that my small act of kindness had followed him into battles I would never hear about. Not yet. The first glimpse of Washington came as a pale shimmer on the horizon, the kind of soft gray light that settles over a city before it fully wakes. The SUVs cut through traffic with an authority that made other cars part instinctively. I sat between 2 officers now, one having moved to the back to sit beside me. As the level of protocol tightened, the closer we drew to the Pentagon. I tried to keep my hands still in my lap, but they betrayed every tremor of nerves inside me. I had never been to Washington in my life. I had never been farther east than Ohio. Yet now I was being driven past landmarks I had only ever seen on television, the Washington Monument rising like a pale needle through the morning haze, the dome of the Capitol, gleaming faintly government buildings stretching in every direction like a grid of power I had never imagined stepping into. When the Pentagon came into view, its shape was unmistakable even from a distance. Vast, imposing, precise. 5 perfect sides enclosing a world I had no business entering. The SUV slowed at a series of security checkpoints. Each time guards approached with unreadable expressions, scanned badges, checked names, and glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and something else puzzlement maybe. I imagined what they were thinking. Who is this older woman in a faded coat climbing out of a car meant for diplomats and military brass? What could someone like me possibly have to do with a place like this? We finally cleared the last checkpoint and the motorcade rolled into an underground parking structure. The moment I stepped out, the temperature shifted cool, sanitized air that smelled faintly of metal and old stone. The officers didn't hurry me, but their steps carried purpose. I followed them through a secure entrance where more guards stood flanking a reinforced door. One of the officers presented his credentials, and after a brief verification, the door buzzed open. Inside was nothing like what I expected. I had imagined cold corridors, fluorescent lights, maybe something resembling the war rooms I'd seen in movies. Instead, the hallway was surprisingly quiet, carpeted with soft lighting that made it feel almost like a museum. Portraits of generals, dignitaries, and historical moments lined the walls, each one a framed reminder of a world built on decisions far removed from the life I had lived. As we walked, my mind raced ahead to what waited for me. Why would Lucas General Gray bring me here? What could possibly bridge the distance between a boy I fed in a diner 30 years ago and a man whose name was now spoken in the same breath as the Pentagon? We stopped outside a conference room guarded by 2 more officers. The lead liaison spoke into an intercom, and after a short pause, the door unlocked with a soft click. "Ms. Harper," he said quietly, "everything inside belongs to you." The room was warm, softly lit with a long wooden table at its center. But my eyes went immediately to 3 objects laid out carefully beneath a spotlight: a wooden box sealed with a brass clasp, a thick folder marked with a large red stamp reading "Declassified," and a white envelope with my name written on it in a handwriting I hadn't seen in 30 years. My breath left my body in one long, shaky exhale. A woman in uniform stood near the end of the table, her presence commanding but her expression gentle. Silver oak leaves on her shoulders, an Army lieutenant colonel. She stepped forward and extended a hand. "Ms. Harper, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Avery. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I didn't exactly feel like I had a choice." I said, my voice almost a whisper. She smiled faintly. "General Gray insisted that when the time came, you would be the first to hear the truth." My knees weakened, and I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "The truth about what?" Her gaze softened with something like sympathy. "About the role you played in his life, and the role he hoped you would play now." I stared at the envelope again, my name written with such careful strokes, as if each letter carried weight. As if he had written it slowly, knowing it would take decades to reach me. "Please," Colonel Avery said quietly, gesturing toward the chair's sit. "We have much to share with you." And as I lowered myself into the seat, my heart hammering so loudly I thought they must hear it, one realization settled over me with undeniable clarity. Whatever lay inside that envelope was about to unravel everything I believed about that night in 1991. Colonel Avery took a seat across from me, folding her hands with the kind of measured calm that comes from years of delivering difficult truths. The 2 liaisons who brought me here stood near the door, silent but attentive, as though the room itself were holding its breath. The colonel nodded toward the wooden box and the declassified folder, but did not yet invite me to touch them. Instead, she began with a slow exhale, as though gathering the right place to start. "Evelyn," she said, using my name gently. "General Gray spoke often about the night he met you, more often than you might imagine." My heart thudded painfully. "I only fed him a meal," I whispered, "and gave him a dry towel." "It was nothing." The colonel shook her head. "To you, maybe. To him, it was the first kindness he had received in months, possibly years." She opened the folder. Inside were pages of mission reports, commendation summaries, psychological evaluations, and snapshots of a life lived in shadows and deserts and battlefields. "Lucas Gray did not come from privilege," she continued. "You probably gathered that. His childhood was fragmented, unstable. He spent most of it in foster care, bouncing from home to home. He enlisted because he believed service would give him structure, a purpose. I nodded, remembering how he'd said he hoped the Army would make him braver than he felt. In the years after he met you, the colonel continued, Private Gray was deployed to several high-conflict zones. His commanders described him as disciplined, exceptionally observant, and relentlessly loyal. But there was something else. She pulled out a worn, laminated note, the napkin. My breath caught. My words faded, but still legible, carefully preserved as if they were scripture. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing someone else's safety over your own. He carried this with him, she said softly. Everywhere. My hand flew to my mouth. I didn't know. How could you? She said. But he did. And he credited this message with shaping the leader he became. The colonel turned another page. In 1993, during a humanitarian mission overseas, a transport convoy came under fire. Several soldiers panicked. Visibility was low, radio contact compromised. It was Gray who stood up at only 21 and repeated the words you gave him. He steadied the team, reorganized their movement, and saved 7 lives. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. They gave him a commendation for that, she said. But he always insisted the true credit belonged to the woman in a diner who saw more in him than he saw in himself. My throat tightened painfully. He really said that. Often, she said. More than often. It became part of his leadership philosophy. She slid forward a photograph, Lucas standing in desert fatigues dust coating his boots, smiling the small, tired smile I remembered from the diner. In his hand, pinned to his vest, was a laminated card. The card held the napkin's words. Over the next decade, she continued. Gray rose quickly. Special operations. Crisis response teams. Intelligence-coordinated rescue missions. He built a reputation for seeing people, really seeing them when others dismissed them. He credited you for that. He said you were the first person to remind him that kindness had power. I shook my head slowly. I didn't save him. Evelyn, she said, leaning forward slightly. You saved the part of him that saved others. The colonel opened another section of the folder. He never stopped looking for you. In 1994, he took leave and returned to your town. The diner had closed. You'd moved. No forwarding address. In 1997, he tried again. He checked public records, phone directories. Nothing. I changed my last name, I said quietly. I know, she replied. And every time he came close to finding you, life moved you just out of reach. In 2002, he even hired a private investigator, but records in rural counties were disorganized. Too many gaps, too many missing pieces. The idea that he had been searching for me for years, possibly decades, unraveled something inside me I didn't know, was still tightly wound. Eventually, she continued his career, reached a point where he could not publicly disappear to search without drawing attention. But privately, he never stopped. She paused, letting the weight of that settle. Now, she said, there's something else you need to know. Something harder. The air in the room chilled. She drew out another document, this one stamped with casualty classification markers. My heartbeat wavered. General Lucas Gray died 11 months ago during an operation overseas. Her voice softened. He sustained injuries that were not survivable. His team brought him home. He spent his final days in a military hospital in Germany. My world tilted. The room blurred at the edges. But before he lost consciousness for the last time, she continued, he issued several directives. His final mission orders, if you will. Among them was a single handwritten instruction requiring the Department of Defense to locate you, notify you, and deliver the contents of this box and letter. I stared at the wooden box, feeling its presence, as if it radiated warmth. Why? I whispered. Why would he do that after all these years? The colonel opened the box with careful hands. Inside lay several objects wrapped in protective cloth. She lifted the first, a glass frame containing the napkin, its edges fragile, its ink smudged but still readable. This, she said, was the item he asked to have placed near him during his final hours. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. She lifted the second object, a medal. Not just any medal, the highest military honor short of the Medal of Honor itself. awarded for extraordinary bravery in situations classified as life-threatening. He wanted you to have this, the colonel said, because he believed every act of courage he carried out traced back to you. My breath shook. I'm just a waitress, I said. I was just a woman working a night shift. You were the moment that reminded him who he wanted to become. She said, sometimes that matters more than anything. She lifted the third item, a photograph. 3 soldiers stood together holding a handmade sign, for Evelyn. Thank you. I covered my mouth with both hands. She continued. In his final directive, he also requested that funding from his military estate be used to establish a scholarship in your name. The Evelyn Harper Courage Scholarship. Its purpose is to support children of low-income veterans, those who remind him of himself. My knees weakened again. He did all that because of one night? She nodded. One meal, one kindness, one reminder that he mattered. I stared at the napkin, the medal, the photograph, and felt the years collapse inward. There's also the letter, she said, sliding the sealed envelope toward me. My name was written in strong, deliberate handwriting. When you're ready, you may read it. But understand this, everything he became, he believed, started with you. And in that moment, for the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to believe that one night in 1991 had never been forgotten, that the boy I fed in the storm had carried me with him through every battlefield, every mission, every moment he taught others what courage meant. And that somehow, across all those years, across all those missed connections, he had found his way back to me. My hands hovered over the sealed envelope as if touching it might break something fragile inside me. The room was silent except for the low hum of ventilation, the kind of sterile quiet you only hear in places built to hold secrets. Colonel Avery watched me with steady patience, her expression softening as I finally slid a fingertip beneath the flap and opened the letter addressed in Lucas's unmistakable handwriting. The paper inside was thick, almost textured, as though chosen intentionally, something meant to last. My name appeared at the top in a smooth, deliberate script. Evelyn. Just that. No. Dear no formality. As if 30 years had folded into a single breath and we were exactly where we had left off. I took a slow inhale and began to read. If you are reading this, it means the Pentagon followed my instructions, which means I'm no longer here to tell you these things myself. I wish that weren't true. I've had 30 years to imagine what I would say if I ever found you again, and I still don't think this letter does justice to what you gave me. I paused, tightening my grip on the page. The ink looked slightly blurred in places as though the pen had hesitated, or perhaps his hands had been unsteady when he wrote it. My eyes drifted down. I want to start with the thing you always tried to wave away. That night in 1991 when I walked into your diner soaking wet, scared and starving, you saved me. Not with the food, though. God knows I needed it. You saved me with your kindness. You were the first person in months to look at me like I wasn't a burden, the first person to speak to me like I mattered. You didn't know what I'd come from. You didn't know how invisible I felt. But you looked at me, Evelyn. You saw me. My vision blurred, and I wiped at my eyes, but the tears kept coming. When you said those words about courage not being the absence of fear, I didn't understand then how deeply I needed them. I wrote them down because something inside me recognized them as truth. A truth I had never been given before. I carried that napkin with me from that night forward, through training, through deployments, through firefights and sandstorms and moments when I wasn't sure I'd live to see the next sunrise. That napkin stayed with me longer than any friend, any commanding officer, any piece of equipment. Every time I felt like the fear was going to swallow me, I took it out and read your words again. Courage is choosing someone else's safety over your own. That single sentence changed my life. You changed my life. I pressed the letter to my chest for a moment, trying to steady myself. The idea of him pulling out that fragile napkin in the middle of war zones felt almost surreal, like 2 versions of the world, my small diner and his battlefield reality touching across impossible distance. I forced myself to keep reading. You need to know something else. Every life I saved. I believed I saved because you saved me first. That may sound dramatic, but it's the truth. When the soldiers under my command were scared, I gave them your words. When they doubted themselves, I reminded them the same way you reminded me. When the world felt too big, too cruel, too broken, I remembered that somewhere out there was a woman who offered kindness to a stranger without expecting anything in return. I lived by that memory. I led by it. My breath trembled as the letters on the page blurred again. Lucas had lived decades in a world of danger and violence, yet the thing he clung to, the anchor he built himself around, was a moment I barely understood the importance of at the time. There is something harder I need to tell you. I tried to find you, more times than I want to admit. I came back to the diner. It was gone. I checked county records, but your name had changed. I looked for forwarding addresses, but you had moved. It always seemed like I was one step behind you. Or maybe the universe wasn't ready yet. Maybe it knew that if we'd met again earlier, my life or yours would have gone down a different path. I don't know. I only know that I never stopped hoping I would find you someday, even when hope felt foolish, even when it hurt. I clutched the letter so tightly the edges bit into my palms. All those years, both of us believing the other had simply moved on. Meanwhile, we had been orbiting the memory of that night like two lonely planets searching for the same star. The next lines made my heart stutter. I want you to know something before you hear it from anyone else. I was not afraid to die. I don't want you to imagine me in pain or alone. My men were with me, and in my final hours, I asked for only one thing: the napkin with your words on it. The nurses didn't understand. Maybe the doctors didn't either. But those words held my entire journey. They reminded me that I was never really alone, that someone in this world once offered me a moment of humanity when I needed it most. I lowered the paper, unable to breathe for several seconds. He had carried those words to his final breath. The weight of that settled on me with a mix of grief and awe that felt almost too large to hold. I returned to the letter. I hope the Pentagon brought you to the room where they placed the box. Inside is everything I wanted you to have. The medal is not because I want you to think I was a hero. It's because every act of courage I committed came from the seed you planted. It belongs to you as much as it ever belonged to me. And the scholarship, I named it after you because the world needs more people like you. Quiet heroes. People who choose compassion when no one is watching. People who save others without realizing it. My hands shook as I read the next line. I wish I could have seen you one more time. I wish I could have thanked you in person. I wish I could have told you that your kindness shaped not just a soldier or an officer or a general, but a man who finally understood that love is not something fragile. It's something carried, something lived, something honored. And I honored you every day of my life. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to contain a sob that escaped anyway, raw and aching. The next lines felt like a whisper across 3 decades. If they found you, it means you're still alive. It means you're reading this. It means I finally reached you. Thank you, Evelyn, for the meal, for the words, for the hope you gave me, for everything I became because of you. With gratitude that outlived me. Lucas Gray. There was a small signature at the bottom, a looping cursive that felt exactly like the young man I'd met, and just beneath it in smaller letters, almost an afterthought, I kept my promise. I came back, my chest constricted, my vision blurred completely. He had come back, just not in the way either of us imagined. I folded the letter slowly, reverently, as though handling something sacred. When I finally raised my head, Colonel Avery's eyes glistened with restrained emotion. And for the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to truly mourn the boy who had walked into my diner and the man he had become. I was still holding the folded letter when Colonel Avery cleared her throat gently, the kind of sound meant to pull someone back from a place too deep to stay in for long. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, embarrassed by how openly I had cried in front of these uniformed strangers. But the Colonel's expression held nothing but understanding. "There is one more thing General Gray instructed us to do," she said softly. Her voice had changed almost cautious, as though what she was about to say carried its own weight. I straightened a little, bracing myself. "He asked that we locate someone connected to you, someone who has been looking for you for a very long time." My heart skipped. I didn't know anyone who would fit that description. Not anymore. Not after the years I'd spent drifting from job to job and town to town, convinced no one even remembered my name. Before I could ask what she meant, the colonel nodded toward the door. A young officer stepped out into the hallway. A moment later, footsteps approached, light, hesitant, trembling. The door opened, and there she was, my daughter. Emily stood framed in the doorway, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She was in her mid-30s now, older than Lucas had been when he died. Her dark hair fell past her shoulders, and her eyes, my eyes, were already brimming with tears the moment they met mine. "Mom!" Her voice cracked on the single word. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I had spent 15 years believing she hated me, believing she had chosen her father's life and left mine behind without a second thought. I thought I'd made my peace with it, but seeing her now shattered whatever fragile shell I had built to survive the loss. "How?" I whispered. "How did you find me?" She stepped into the room, barely able to speak through her tears. "General Gray's Foundation. When they released the scholarship list, I saw your name. I didn't think it could really be you, but I hoped. God, Mom, I hoped." She covered her mouth with both hands and sobbed. "I've been looking for you for so long." I rose from my chair on unsteady legs. For a heartbeat, we simply stared at each other, two people who had lived entire lives believing the other was gone. Then she rushed forward, and I caught her in my arms. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't composed the way reunions are in movies. It was messy and shaking and full of 15 years of grief and guilt and longing. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I believed what people told me. I'm sorry I didn't try harder." I held her even tighter. "No, baby. I'm the one who's sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have found you." She shook her head fiercely. "We're here now. That's what matters." And standing in that Pentagon conference room with the letter of a fallen general in my pocket and my daughter's arms around me, I realized Lucas had given me one last gift. He hadn't only found his way back to me. He'd brought her back too. The ceremony took place 3 days later in a vast auditorium inside the Pentagon, reserved for events honoring lives that had shaped the nation in ways most people would never fully understand. I had expected something small, maybe a handful of officers, a folded flag, a formal salute. Instead, as Emily and I were escorted inside, I found myself facing rows of uniforms stretching farther than I could see, medals gleaming under soft white lights, every seat filled. A screen at the front displayed a single image: Lucas in his dress blues, standing tall, eyes steady, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It hit me that this was how the world knew him. Not the hungry 19-year-old who had walked into my diner dripping rainwater, but the general who had led missions, saved lives, and become a legend whispered about in barracks halls. And somehow, unbelievably, my name was part of this story. When the lights dimmed, a woman stepped up to the podium. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, but her uniform was heavy with ribbons. She introduced herself as Colonel Reeves, one of the soldiers Lucas had saved during a mission gone terribly wrong. Her voice didn't tremble, but something in it carried the weight of a debt that could never be repaid. General Gray never took credit for what he did that night she began. He always said he was simply doing what any soldier would have done, but we knew better. We knew he carried something inside him, an anchor, a light, a memory he returned to when things were darkest. And that memory was a woman named Evelyn Harper. A soft murmur rippled through the room. My breath caught. Colonel Reeves continued recounting a mission I had never heard of, one the public had only known as a brief line in a news article years ago. A team trapped behind collapsing infrastructure communications downed soldiers panicking. And in the middle of the chaos, Lucas had pulled out a small, worn piece of paper and read words that steadied the entire unit. Words he said had been given to him by a woman in a diner one winter night long ago. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing someone else's safety over your own." The auditorium fell into reverent silence. I saw heads bow. I saw shoulders square. I saw tears glint in the eyes of men and women who had survived things most civilians could never imagine. Lucas said those words saved him first, Colonel Reeves said. And because they saved him, they saved us. Today we honor the man who carried those words through 3 decades of service. And we honor the woman who gave him the courage to carry them. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't look anywhere except at the floor because the weight of it felt too enormous, too impossible. How could something I said in a moment of instinct, spoken to comfort a frightened boy, end up shaping the lives of so many? Colonel Reeves gestured for me to approach the stage. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me as I rose. Emily squeezed my hand before letting go. When I reached the podium, the colonel placed a framed citation in my hands, an official recognition from the Department of Defense. Her voice softened. Ms. Harper General Gray asked that you speak today. We would be honored to hear anything you wish to share. I looked out over the sea of faces. Soldiers young enough to be my grandchildren. Veterans who carried decades of memories in their eyes. Officers who had built careers in the shadow of Lucas's leadership. My hands shook, but my voice somehow did not. Courage, I said slowly, isn't loud. It isn't the dramatic thing people imagine. It's quiet. It's choosing kindness when no one expects it. One night, I offered a meal to a soldier who looked like the world had forgotten him. I never imagined that moment would ripple outward into lives I'd never meet. But that's the thing about courage. It spreads, from one person to the next. Lucas carried it farther than I ever could have, and I am so proud that a piece of his journey began in my little diner. A hush settled over the room, deep and full. When I stepped back, people rose to their feet. The applause wasn't loud or thunderous. It was steady, heartfelt, the kind that wraps around you like a warm cloak. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not for my mistakes. Not for the years I had vanished from the world, but for the simple truth that sometimes even the smallest acts leave shadows long enough to outlive us. Emily met me as I stepped off the stage, tears shining in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "he would have been so proud." And for the first time since reading Lucas's letter, I believed it. I moved into a small apartment outside Arlington a month after the ceremony, close enough for Emily to visit on her lunch breaks, and far enough from the noise of the city that I could still hear myself think. For the first time in years, my life didn't feel like something I was surviving. It felt like something opening. The scholarship board met once a quarter, and although I was technically only an honorary advisor, they treated my voice as though it carried the same weight as Lucas's final directive. Every meeting began with a moment of silence in his honor. Every meeting ended with someone reminding us why the fund existed in the first place, to catch the children of service members when life tried to swallow them whole. I would sit quietly, hands folded, listening to the stories of teenagers who reminded me so much of that 19-year-old boy in the diner. Kids who had lost parents to war. Kids who had been uprooted so often they no longer knew where home was. Kids who needed someone to look at them the way I had once looked at Lucas, with gentleness, with steadiness, with belief. It surprised me how naturally the work settled into my life, how right it felt to offer the very thing I had thought I'd lost over the years' purpose. I visited the Pentagon often, usually escorted by the same young lieutenant who had stood outside the conference room when Emily first walked in. Everyone treated me not like an outsider, but like someone woven into a part of General Gray's legacy. It still felt strange sometimes, humbling, unreal, but it made me proud too in a quiet, private way I knew Lucas would have understood. Emily and I spent long afternoons rebuilding what we had lost. She brought photo albums to my apartment, showing me the years I had missed her high school prom, her college graduation, her wedding. I mourned the time we would never get back, but I cherished the chance to build something new. She even brought her 2 children to meet me, and the first time my granddaughter called me Grandma Evie, something inside me broke open and healed at the same time. One evening close to the anniversary of Lucas's passing, I found myself standing in my living room looking up at the shadow box mounted on the wall. Inside it were 3 things: the napkin with my faded handwriting pressed behind glass, the medal he had left for me, and a small photograph of Lucas smiling faintly in the desert sun, wind tugging at the edge of his uniform. I reached up and touched the glass lightly as though greeting an old friend. "You kept your promise, Lucas," I whispered. "You found your way back." Outside, the late spring air drifted in through the open window, warm and soft. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the rumble of a helicopter from a nearby base, a sound that once would have made me flinch. Now it just felt like part of the story. My story. His story. Our story. Life has a way of circling back in ways we never expect. A single meal in a small town diner had rippled outward into decades, touching lives I would never meet. And as I stood there, the fading evening light catching the framed napkin, I realized something simple and profound. Kindness has a longer lifespan than any of us, and courage, once shared, never truly dies. Sometimes a story stays with us not because of the grand moments, but because of the quiet ones, the ones so small, so ordinary, that we almost overlook their power. Tonight, you watched how a single meal given to a hungry young soldier in 1991 rippled across 3 decades. You saw how a few gentle words became a compass, a man carried into war, into leadership, into every life he saved. You saw how kindness, when offered without expectation, returns in ways we never imagined through gratitude, through legacy, through healing we didn't even know we still needed. In a world that often feels divided, loud or unforgiving stories like this remind us of something simple and profound. The smallest human act can alter the course of a life, sometimes even the world. Most of us will never wear a uniform or stand inside the Pentagon. Most of us will never have medals engraved with our names. But all of us, every single one of us, will have a moment when someone needs our kindness. A stranger at a counter, a neighbor we've stopped noticing, a young person who feels invisible, a family member we've drifted from. And in that moment, the question is never, will this change the world? The question is, will I choose to see them? Evelyn didn't know her words would travel with Lucas through deserts and battlefields. She didn't know her warmth would one day become the courage of an entire unit. She didn't know her compassion would bring her daughter back to her after 15 long years. She simply chose to be kind when it mattered, and that choice echoed for 30 years. Maybe that's the real message here. None of us are too small to matter. None of us are too late to begin again. None of us are beyond the reach of grace or the possibility of second chances. If this story found you today, maybe it found you for a reason. Maybe it's reminding you that the love you gave years ago was not wasted, that the people you helped remember you more than you think, that the seeds of goodness you planted in silence are still growing somewhere you can't yet see. Or maybe it's asking you to take one quiet step of courage today, reach out to someone, forgive someone, help someone who doesn't expect it, because kindness doesn't die. It lives on in the lives it touches. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the goodness still left in the world, I hope you'll stay with us. There are more stories waiting, stories of redemption, reunions, miracles, and the incredible things that happen when ordinary people choose compassion. Subscribe, share, and tell us where you're watching from. And above all, keep choosing kindness. It might just change someone's life. It might even change yours.